Welcome to the Cyber Life Podcast, where we help you learn cybersecurity best practices, give you a weekly update on the latest cybersecurity news, and share valuable career advice. Hey everyone, in today's episode, I have a good friend of mine, Chip Harris. Chip is a senior level pen tester right now, or quote unquote ethical hacker. He's got over 20 years experience in the cybersecurity world across a number of different areas. He's done a lot of work for government agencies, so a lot of classified work. He's authored textbooks that are used by university programs. He's written content for the University of Arizona's cybersecurity master's degree program. And like I said, he's got decades of experience primarily in the critical infrastructure space. So if you think about oil and gas or water plants, power grids, et cetera, Chip's involved in all that stuff for many governments around the world, not just the U.S. And you can find Chip as a guest on many podcasts, as well as a guest over on the Cyber Life television show episodes over on YouTube. So if you're watching this or listening to this episode over on YouTube, just do a quick search for Chip and you'll see the TV show episodes that I'm talking about. And if you're not, then just go over and search my name, Ken Underhill, on YouTube, and you'll find the channel, and then you'll be able to find Chip's television show appearance from there. So you will notice that we are using a fake image for Chip. Again, that's because he does a lot of classified work and we can't put his actual photo out there, but I have seen him, his real face, and I can tell you that if you just picture like a Calvin Klein model or Abercrombie and Fitch model or some other type of male model, that's exactly what Chip looks like. So without further ado, let's dive right in with Chip. And today we're going to be talking about critical infrastructure, kind of breaking down what that actually is and some of the things that organizations can do, as well as for those that are maybe looking at this as a career path. Chip's going to share some advice on that. So again, let's dive right in and learn from Chip. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, Chip. You're world famous by now. So we're going to talk today about critical.
At least in my mind, I am.
Well, and that's all that matters, right? What we consider about ourselves in our own mind. So today we're going to talk about critical infrastructure, all things kind of around that, without giving away anything classified, or at least we hope we won't. We'll see what happens. If I get some people with suits knocking on my door, I know we went a little too far. But for those that don't know, Chip, like, what is critical infrastructure and why? And I think when you answer like what is it, you're kind of allude to the next part of the question, which is why is it a prime target for cyber attacks?
Yes. Okay. So in the IT world, you have information technology. Information technology being your servers, your laptop, your work desktop, your remote connections, stuff like that. Stuff that like the cloud services. That is, stuff that you're using on a computer. That is IT stuff. Your server, your data centers, SQL databases, so forth. Then you have on the other side, there's a line, and then there's operational technology. Operational technology stands for OT, or in the OT world, as we call it, is where you have lighting, plumbing, water, building automation systems, your telephones, your lighting in your phones, as well as, anything that deals with your power connections, for those things. Like I tell people, if you go outside and you look at your meter that's on your house, normally it's a digital meter. Well, that digital meter connects, to a light pole. That light pole then runs back to a colo, that runs to a step down, that runs to a power plant, so that is what operational technology is. As I termed it, years ago, it's the world underneath the world that you don't see. You don't really think about, oh, I flip on a switch. Well, where did that come from? Or I turn on the water or the tap and, there's water that starts coming out. People don't really sometimes think about all the process and the processes that's involved in that of operational technology, of where it comes from.
Are you able to give some examples of, and it doesn't have to be necessarily recent, but just cyber attacks that, whether it's U.S. or externally around the world, but just kind of attacks that people might have seen like in the news, like they can kind of have that aha moment, be like, oh, okay, that's critical infrastructure.
Well, yes, absolutely. Operational technology is just susceptible to malware, ransomware attacks, and very specialized attacks, because the attacks that happen on them happen on SCADA-based systems, or PLCs, paralogic controllers, and or programmable logic controllers. You have different types of these things. Some of these are vendor-owned and operated, and when they're attacked, they're normally attacked, sometimes around a specific vendor. So to give an example of that is, there was one that was called Sandworm, which they named after the sandworm from the, Frank Herbert books called Dune, which is also an HBO, movie series as well. But Sandworm actually was a very highly specialized malware program and basically called wiper software. So in other words, it wipes out all the information, instantaneously that's on a drive, bricks the drive, and makes it unusable. But this malware that was written, it's pretty much been known to attack certain specialized power grid systems, and it was actually created and used by the FSB, which is the Russian Secret Service, as well as the SVR, which is their version of the CIA, to attack Ukraine and turn off their critical infrastructure and power, and wipe those systems completely clean to where there is nothing left on them, and that means that big, huge land areas and masses of the country, instead of dropping bombs and missiles on them, they just dropped some code, which completely turned off and wiped out some of those actual systems. The very good news is that malware and ransomware did not attack their nuclear power facilities. If not, we would have had another Chernobyl-like event. So these things are very highly specialized, very customized code, and very specific on the things that they do. And what makes it so hard for people to understand, especially when it comes down to these attacks, is that computers update regularly. They patch, and they have services that come out to them, whether it be Windows or Linux or Apple. There's always patches and services and upgrades that are done to those on a very regular basis. Now, in OT technology, that's completely different. Their patch management cycle sometimes is 1 year, sometimes every 5 years, or on demand. And there's a monetary, green paper cost that goes with those things. So, for when the government agency that I work with, when we had to patch our systems, we had to pay that vendor a very huge sum of money to patch those systems because, well, we didn't have access to those systems. They're vendor owned, managed, and controlled. We have very limited access to that. So we paid a couple $1 million to upgrade certain facilities to where this attack that was happening over in the Ukraine would not come over and attack the US. The other part of that, though, too, is, and what makes it so interesting, is that we have seen things like that before in the past. For an example, they use code names. Ken. So one of them, is like Dark Energy, Sandworm, Operation Steel Rain, Titan Rain. There was a lot of these operations that that have been categorized and been happening for years and years and years. People think this is a new thing. Well, actually, it's not. These attacks have been happening since the early 90s, and the ransomware and malware that attack some of these systems, for example, like Saudi Aramco, was the first cyber weapon that was actually chronologically logged and used was called Stuxnet, which most people know what Stuxnet is. It was, a customized code that was attacked, PLCs and, the Iranians that would have the ability of processing and refining nuclear weapon stock to create a bomb. That's what Stuxnet did. Stuxnet went out there and, these containers, that actually, make and rods that actually make, plutonium and uranium is, very customized systems, very finite. It's trial and error kind of systems. And what happened was, code was introduced in Stuxnet, destroyed those systems, wiped them out, hurt their PLCs, and then set them back a couple of years to where they couldn't, refine and produce uranium. Well, guess what? Their retaliatory attack, was against Saudi Arabia, and it was, known as the Saudi Aramco attack, where they completely wiped out their oil production computers. All 60,000 of them were bricked. So, this is sometimes it hits the news, sometimes it doesn't, and it depends on what, who, what, when, where, and how much, is affected. But as I tell people, in IT systems, you lose data. It's very inconvenient. You lose records, social security numbers, informational data. In OT technology, people get hurt because it affects the physical world. These attacks and these things that happen shut off power, shut off water, cause things to blow up, cause things to have damage. And, there's always a human collateral damage and toll that actually comes with OT technology when it is attacked because it is impacting the physical world.
So if we think about things like the supply chain, right? So obviously critical infrastructure has a supply chain. If for example, for those listening, if you have kids and let's say you got a little baby, the baby has to eat. So unless you make your own baby food, you go to the store, you buy the baby food. There's an entire process in place, right? For that to go from, what carrots, let's say for baby food,
Yeah.
getting processed to
Yeah.
be put in the little jar to eventually get to the store shelf for you to actually buy it. So when we think about kind of that entire chain there, maybe just as a general example, like how can an organization try to mitigate the risk in their supply chain?
Well, that is first off, a very good question. Thank you for asking that. And when we do have our supply chain is very fragile, very, very fragile. And very good example is the baby food that you're talking about, as well as meat, poultry. A lot of these things, are dependent on international commerce, in other words, coming in from a port or port of call, then getting, into a warehouse and being distributed either by rail, by train, or by truck. And then, being able to be received at a receiving area like a receiving dock, and then being able to put on the shelves. Um, and the baby food formula was a very good example of two things. One was that there's not a lot of those manufacturers in the United States. There's only three. So one of the plants shut down due to, environmental standards not being met, and as well as they had a cyber attack. And that affected, their processing and processing systems because they did not have nor pass, FDA regulation, which is our food, drug regulation. And then on top of that, they had a cyber attack, which wiped out a lot of their systems. Now, they have yet to come out and say, oh, we knew about that, or we knew that some of these systems, were vulnerable because we had put them publicly onto the internet, in the cloud, which I was like, well, that's a very bad idea because, those systems have the ability of being attacked, not only from the cloud, but they have the ability of being attacked on-prem, and you made those systems publicly, accessible through ports because you connected those systems to the public internet. So you're just basically asking for it. And it hurt, and it hurt a lot because, that was a shortage of, a need that, was needed for children. So that really affects kids, and that also affects, our poultry, our dairy, and the supply chain is very OT, dependent, very OT dependent, because if you don't have communication between stuff that's actually being happening in the transportation industry that correlates with supply and demand, which that's how commerce works, and then the supply and demand, and taking that and putting that into a cycle of from port to shelf, as I tell people. In other words, it comes in from a port down to the transportation system, down to the management systems that control those, down to the OT systems that help bottle can and help the distribution of those, down to how they get onto a truck and then is sent to your local supermarket that's then put on the shelves after they break down that stuff from a pallet. So that there's a lot of steps that's involved with that, IT and OT. And if those things break, well, guess what? There's a downtime, and it causes a domino effect of those things to fall down. Now, people say, oh, we'll throw blockchain on it, or we'll throw AI on it, or we'll throw, pattern-based learning and intelligent design stuff on it. That's fine and dandy, but that doesn't necessarily work in OT. OT is a lot different than IT. Now, from a management standpoint of view, IT is great doing that. But from a distribution standpoint of view, not so much.
So how do you, obviously organizations these days are all about the AI buzz, right? Oh my gosh, AI is going to solve all our problems. Where do you like kind of foresee organizations trying to leverage AI in the critical infrastructure space, and then also like sharing your opinions on that? And when you share opinions, please try to keep it G-rated.
I, I,
But but you just kind of like where do you see it?
yeah.
Where do you see them? Because obviously practitioners, right, like yourself, know a lot of the risk, but I feel like there's going to be a push in that area from some senior leaders that maybe aren't, I don't want to say smart enough, that sounds bad, but like they're not educated enough. They're focused on the business side of things. So like where do you maybe see that they're going to try to put that in play, and what are some of the concerns around that?
I will start with the AI question first. Okay, AI is not a new thing; it's been around for a long, long time. It's just now becoming more publicly accessible, like Chat GPT and whatever GPT that you want to be able to use for either from code development on down, because it's using different patterns and intelligent database systems to create and generate everything from code down to text down to books and so forth. In AI, will we eventually see some of those management systems used in OT? Yes. Are they happening like as of right now? The answer is no. For the reason being is that when you look at a building, for example, like a skyrise or even your local warehouse, that you see, that's there, it's got conveyor belts, and it's got stuff that moves product around, and even in a building you've got air conditioning, HVAC, power, electrical, sewer, so forth. A lot of those systems are vendor owned and managed, and there are multiple different systems that are there. And will they eventually go under a blanketed tarp AI? That is possible, in the future. That's great. I would love to be able to do something and have something to where it's going to be able to interact with all those different systems all at once, all from one console, and then help me be able to control and maintain those systems. Um, you can do that to an extent now, but not to the point to where it's AI controlled. There has to be someone looking at the screen, that when a flow monitor kicks off at a water treatment facility, for someone to know what the screen means, what it's saying, and then to be able to turn it on and off again. Say that controller went completely down, that means that somebody physically has to go to that location and turn that valve on and off, either what they call hand crank it. They got to be able to physically touch it and be able to turn it on and off if the systems actually fail. Now, we can't do that really right now with AI in a sense. In a sense, we can use it for detection, and monitoring. We can use it for pattern-based learning, for anomalous, detection of errors or code, but not to the point to where it's going to 100% replace a human being, to where it's kind of like and I love it that people use Terminator or Skynet or anything. That doesn't exist now. It won't exist, for a very long time, because we are still having to be able to use those systems, as a what we call one-off system. So, in other words, HVAC is a one-off system versus plumbing that's an uh, one-off system. One might be controlled by a vendor like Siemens. The other one might be controlled by another company like ABB or Bosch or whomsoever the vendor may be. So trying to get all of those things wrangled into one system is very hard, because a lot of those systems are proprietary. Same thing like healthcare. We cannot put AI on, an X-ray machine yet, or a CAT scan or MRI, because of we don't want those systems to be accessible to the internet or susceptible to be changed by the vendor or being changed by accident to where we irradiate someone, and kill them. So there are stop gaps right now that will always have to be in place because of human element in human error. That's just a given. It's just how we are. We are not infallible creatures. Code is not infallible, and neither is AI. AI makes mistakes as well. And my personal opinion is that yes, it is really cool and it's really nice to talk about, but is it practical for right now for me to put that into the systems that I control and monitor and help create? No, no, it's not. It's not. We are not there yet. It can help with design and design issues, and it can help with, those things, but it can't do 100% implementation to where the human element is, completely removed and taken out of it. And maybe in 20, 25, 30 years, our code's going to have to improve. Our processes are going to have to improve. Our intellectual, well-being is going to have to improve because that takes on a ton of vulnerability and risk. If I just give it over to the computer system and I take myself out of it to where I can't control those things, and a malicious actor gets in and, reprograms that code and says, okay, I'm going to make the temperature instead of 80 degrees, come out of all the water heaters in a city. I'm going to raise it up to 100 because they're digitally monitoring and creating and changing those settings, or I'm going to cause irregular pressure, in a valve that could cause, a steam vent to blow, or a water, pipe to explode due to the pneumatics of pressure change, and that could blow up out of the city street, or it could blow out of the, in a building and cause, flooding damage, or there's a lot of things that from a risk and vulnerability and management standpoint that we don't, not yet, want to be able to address when it comes down to AI. And that's industry wide, whether it be in IT and OT. But in the OT side, it's really nice to talk about, not practical yet. Will we eventually get there? In time, yes. But there's companies that are, trying to make these things happen, to where they can take all of that, and then be able to decipher it and put it into one management system. But, we have to make that decision. Is that going to be the best thing for us, to where we remove ourselves out of that and leave it up to the computers to run all of these systems by themselves? And us have limited, access, to terminals or emulate those systems for change and change management and vulnerability. We leave that up to the computer to do. So, fascinating, field, to be in right now, especially in OT. And OT, we need as many people, as we can, that can get into learning about, these systems and so forth. It pays very well, and I've talked to a lot of students, a lot of people in the industry. Is like, IT has thousands of people that want to do this stuff, that want to do everything from SOC analyst down to bench tech, down to CISO, to a virtual CSIO, to, firewall and all. And OT, it's a little different. You've got to study a little bit more, and still have good grades, and learn a little bit of IT and engineering and all these different kind of things. And it pays more than IT, because, where there's thousands of people that want to do this stuff in IT, there's only hundreds of people that can do this in OT. And the vendors will train you. There's apprenticeship programs and journeyman programs, that are out there, that you can do. And they'll pay for your college, and they'll pay for your training. And guess what? You got a guaranteed job that pays six figures plus overtime or unionized, depending on where your location's at. And you have a job doing what you want to do. That's awesome, And I see that IT will be a tool in that toolbox to where you have to learn it and know it, and the vendors will embrace it in time. But right now, the answer is no.
So is that like the YouTube videos I see where I can do nothing and in 24 hours I'll have a six-figure job, or does it, like you mentioned, it actually takes real work?
It takes real work, especially, in OT, because, you've got to know a little bit about electricity. You got to know a little bit about engineering and plumbing and, how these systems work, and HVA systems, how they work, and you got to get, IT, you have to know a little bit of code. You have to know a little bit of, dealing with threats and vulnerabilities like I deal with on a daily basis, and there's programs that are out there that are proprietary to a lot of those things. So you have to, you got to take all 10 little fingers and kind of shove them into those 10 little pots and move them all around. And it's really good because you get a taste of everything. And if you want to do field work, that's awesome. That's great. I mean, we need people. We need plumbers and electricians and carpenters and welders. Oh my God, we need these people that we consider blue collar jobs that we've told people for years that we didn't need, or you don't need that. You need to go to school and, get a degree and get all these certifications and be a lawyer or be a doctor or whatnot. Well, guess what? Eventually, someday, you're going to need a damn carpenter and you're going to need a plumber and you're going to need somebody that can weld for you eventually, or help you build a house, or help you do irrigation in your lawn, or help you fix your toilet, and those jobs, are considered to be operational technology jobs. They're blue collar jobs. Now, I'm a blue collar guy trying to make it in a white collar world. Don't get me wrong. That's how I started, and I, especially from the location and where I live, there were not a lot of job options. There was not a lot of, career paths that are in the rural South where I live. So, it was either, work on a farm or, work another blue collar job. And I really wanted to work in IT. I saw computers as the future, in the late 80s, early 90s when I started getting into this, and I started building, a career path of working in cybersecurity, and when I was doing this, there was no such thing as a certified ethical hacker or pen tester or forensic investigator or auditor. But guess what? You could get a degree in welding. You could get a degree, in what we called shop class, which in vocational education, which does not hardly exist anymore, in our public education where I was kind of grew up at. So a lot of this, I learned, from my dad. My dad had access to computers, and I was like, anytime I could get in front of one, I did. And, I kept the blue collar ethic, of learning about, how does plumbing work? How does carpentry work? How does welding work? How do these electrical systems, like how does that fuse box connect to this? But there's a computer connected to it too. So once I started thinking about logical based systems, I was like going, wow, there is a huge world that opened up to me, because either I was going to work in cybersecurity or I wanted to work at a nuclear power plant, and I'm not a nuclear engineer, but I'm a really good, cybersecurity engineer that could work at a nuclear power plant to make sure that bad guys don't hack it. That's, and I learned about FERP and NERP and the agencies that monitor and control, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I learned all their little laws and all the kind of stuff and whatnot. And, I started applying and looking for those jobs. And eventually I found one, with Tennessee Valley, Authority, which is in the upper Nashville area, Tennessee area. And moved up there, lived up there for 6 months, and worked, in cybersecurity, doing, working with their power grid, and how power distribution works and all those kind of things. But, the basic, premise of what I learned about electricity, still the same. Hadn't changed, probably never will change, since Edison and Tesla, those things, AC DC, have not changed, and how we regulate those power, but how the distribution of that has changed a lot because a lot of that was computer driven, and I learned a lot of those things. Same thing when it came down to learning about plumbing. Like, okay, your sink and your toilet and your bathtub drain into a drain that's sent to here to be treated, which is a water treatment facility. Well, how does that work? How do those sensors work? How do we know what's the difference between dirty water versus clean water versus, high filtered water, versus, the chemicals that go in? All that's computer monitored, and regulated. And, we need people to take those jobs. We need people to work, in the electrical industry, the nuclear, industry from a cyber standpoint of view, because those systems, guess what? They're 30 years old, and we are just now at the point figuring out, damn, if I plug in my electric car, it's got more draw than my house does. So if I have to charge my electric car, I'm going to be spending $100, $200 more on electricity because, it's, an electrical car that's going, connecting off the power grid, and it's, eating up, just about as much electricity to charge as a washer dryer unit, and a refrigerator unit and a microwave unit, as well as your housing and lighting in your house. So it's basically adding, more money into your system to charge your electric car. Now, no, I'm all for, electrical vehicles and saving the environment, but I'm not some tree hugging hippie, by any means, and I've told people before is right now, especially in the OT industry, there's many a car company that's looking for that balance between using gasoline and fossil fuels and electric, to where they're doing, a car that can do both, and hopefully we'll see that in our lifetime, and how's that done? That's done all through OT, IT, and engineering, and automotive tech. And, we need more of those people in that industry because we have the changeover that you and I've talked about before in the past of people that are retiring out, the dirty old wizards that controlled, and knew everything and had that knowledge base, and have been there, since the Stone Age, and fire and water were a new thing. Those people are retiring out. They're going to pasture and hopefully enjoy their golden years. And there's not a lot of people right now that are replacing those people. So I'm kind of looping the conversation back around. Is that we need people and institutional technologies as well as public education to pick up the slack and really bring back that vocational education as well as learning how to breadboard, and run circuits and, how lighting works and plumbing, because not everybody's going to be a lawyer. Not everybody's going to be a doctor. Not everybody wants to do that. Hell, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to, be some corporate shill, in some cubicle farm somewhere, looking at a screen, working on Excel spreadsheets all day, waiting for the sweet wreath of death. I mean, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted, to be able to work in IT and OT technology and work in cybersecurity and work in field operations, and do all kinds of stuff. So, and I really wanted specifically to aim my career towards government service, because government controls all of it. I mean, it's all government as well as state regulated. So, and they need as much help as they possibly could. So that's kind of where I've aimed my career for the past almost 10 years.
So, Chip, any final thoughts or advice, either for organizations out there or the career seekers out there?
Sure. For the businesses and the industries, treat IT just like you do OT. Now it's federally regulated that you must not have commingled systems, which that means you cannot have your IT and OT touching each other. From a networking and physical standpoint of view, they have to be treated the same as a IT audit as well as an OT audit. As well as you have an IT system, you have an OT system. And they have to be treated with the same amount of paranoia and cybersecurity and regulation as any other, especially in the medical industry, especially in the government and private sector. Because those things right now are the ones that are being attacked the most, especially, we have an election coming up, so we are gearing up for outside, undue influence from other state nations to be attacking us, not only from an IT perspective, but from an OT perspective. We also see that from domestic terrorism, which is very high on the list right now. Domestically, people, using we call low kinetic attacks. In other words, taking either vehicles or weapons and attacking a power plant or, an electrical distribution plant and causing it, water to go out and facilities to go out to affect, 60, 180,000, 200,000 people. As well as the national power grid. The national power grids, is all interconnected, between each individual states. So if you're driving down the highway and you see those high power lines, that are out there in the field that go for miles and miles and miles, that's your national power grid. That's your systems that connect, one state to the next, and those are under attack. So, you have to treat the same amount of paranoia and security and craziness that comes with IT, when you're dealing with your vendors and patch management and vulnerability and risk, and as well as your audits and everything that you're doing in IT. You got to do that in OT as well. And if you're not, then you are really setting yourself up for a huge, gigantic failure. The number one example I give of that is that I had to go on a certified ethical hacking and pen testing, OT, audit for a hospital. And when I got there, was able to social engineer my way into their systems, and was able to kinetically, connect laptops, jump drives, and hacking tools into their systems and their servers. And then for a week, all I did was monitor their systems on everything that they were doing. And then after that, I was able to move north, south, east, west within their systems, which were IT related, to then get into their OT systems, because they had those systems connected to their internal systems. So guess what? It's all interconnected now. So the IT touches the OT touches the IT. And I started basically doing ethical hacking on those systems and getting as much information as I could. And in my report, I gave that to them, and they said, "So what? That means nothing to me." I'm like, "Well, it means everything to me." And they're like, "Give me an example." So here's the example I used. This is a hospital, by the way. I said, "Okay, this is wintertime. You've got a snowstorm that's outside, just like this was the wintertime when I did this. So I'm kind of painting a picture here, of the landscape. So they were under, 2 or 3, feet of snow in their area, which for a southerner is very weird for us to see because we're not used to it at all. So I was like, okay, first thing I want to do is I want to cut your power, and I'm going to overflow your toilets, and I'm going to take the HVA system and turn the heat off, and I'm going to drop it down to the lowest I possibly can to where it's freezing. So you've got water that's, flowing down the halls. You've got power that's going out, and I'm going to cut off your backup power supply. And immediately I'm going to attack your NICU unit, which is your babies, and the people that are the ICU floor. I'm going to turn all the power off to those systems, because those systems are on 2 different circuits. You got one that's for the lighting, and then you got the other one that's for life-giving care. So that, on the wall, you see that if any hospital, you see those orange, yellow, and green, and red sockets or outlets that are there. They mean something. So I'm going to turn those off. So now you got people that are dying, that are babies, as well as people that are in intensive care. Your halls are starting to flood. Your air conditioning is running at maximum, and you have no power. So the next thing I'll do is, since I have the ability to access your elevator systems, I'm going to turn all your escalators and your elevators off, and I want to wipe those clean. So now you can't use any of your elevator systems. Everybody's now got to, evacuate via the stairs. Then I'm going to pull the alarm system, and when I cut the power unit, then I'm going to cut off everything that is with your records system, or CRM system, that and wipe those servers completely clean, so that you have no patient and records and data of any of your patients throughout the entire hospital. So now you're having to evacuate these people through the ER. You've had to get the fire department involved and all your major public services to get these people to other hospitals, as well as you've got babies dying, people in ICU. They're hopefully, if you have a helicopter pad, you're going to have to evacuate them one by one. And now you have to do everything by paper records, because your records management system and your EMR system's completely been wiped. You have no data, and now you're in a triage situation. And what triage actually from historical means, from a wartime situation, is that you have doctors then have to go into triage, which means they have to separate the people that can live and the people that can die. So in other words, the doctors now have to make a decision of who they can save and who they can't save, who they have to let die because there's no way they can save them, or try to save the people that they possibly can to the highest number and volume that's hackable. So that's what I explained to them, just like I did you, in very, uncertain terms, and laid that in front of them. I said, from this report right here of your hospital, this is what I can do in about 12 hours or less. If I got a team of people, I can do it in 5. And every one of those doctors that was on there was white as a sheet of paper. Their jaws were on the floor. I could hear their sphincters just loosening and their bowels coming loose because they're like going, this one guy that we paid for a week did this much damage, and we didn't know anything about it. I was as silent on the wire as possibly could be. And I painted this horrible, picture of what actually could happen. And I had one doctor saying, this could never happen in the United States. I said, oh, yes, it has. And I was down there when it happened. He's like, where? I said, Hurricane Katrina. You had this exact scenario that I just painted for you at hospitals when Hurricane Katrina hit. And they were like, okay, what do we do to fix this? And that's where the real fun began.
So I think everyone listening is scared to death now. So thanks, Chip.
Well, that's
but,
part of my job.
But that's but you brought up a good point, and I know we're wrapping up here, but the one of the key points here is that you actually let them know like exactly how it could occur, because I think a lot of people, just in general, the general public globally, they just can't fathom. Like they always, like most of them think like, okay, this.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around it. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's a whole different line of thinking, and as I tell people, and I've told you, I've said this many a time on many podcasts with many other hosts, is that there's no good guy in any of these stories, not even me. I mean, there's not. I mean, I get paid to be a professional bad guy and think of the most horrible things that I could do with the vulnerabilities and threats that I find. And it is very hard for the normal person in their day to wrap their head around that. Okay. And that's why this field needs people like you to help educate people on exactly what it is that people like myself can do. And then the people that want to get into this, what they're signing up for. Okay. Because you have to use abstract forward thinking. In other words, you got to think way outside of the box. Most people are thinking in a Polaroid picture. You have to paint a panoramic view. Okay. Like I just explained. So you have to kind of set this, the standards, the mode, the attacks, the environment of the attacks, what can and can't be done, and then the vulnerabilities, the risk, and the management that goes with those systems. Normal Joe Schmo people don't have a clue that this is even possible or it's even going on. So, it is a very, interesting thing, and it's a very scary thing to bring people the awareness of what it is that can be done in OT.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you're looking to secure your business better or build up your cybersecurity career, then check us out over at cyberlife.tv. That's CYBERLIFE.tv.